Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's topic is a very fitting one for the concluding hours and days of the blessed month of Ramadan. Challenges coming out of Ramadan on the human rights front. This will be our focus for today's broadcast, and for this broadcast, it will just be you and I. I have 4 short videos. In fact, the first 2 videos are so short and related that we're going to play them back to back. The first 2 videos. And then we're going to have some discussion on the issues raised in each of these videos, concluding with hopefully some valuable discourse around our political prisoners. With that being said, let's begin, Brother Sadiq, with the first 2 videos for today, inshallah.
And we know the U.S. is on high alert tonight, bracing for a possible Iranian attack in the Middle East. White House and Israeli officials actively preparing for a, quote, significant attack on Israel by Iranian forces, possibly within days. News Nation correspondent Alina Shirazi live in D.C. tonight. Alina, I know you've spoken with your source in the White House. What is the latest that you're tracking tonight?
Natasha, good to be with you again. Well, the Biden administration tells us they're considering how to respond after they learned Iran may be planning to hit targets inside of Israel.
Tensions in the Middle East are rising after Israeli airstrikes in Syria earlier this week killed several Iranian officials. Funerals now held in Tehran for the officers as Iran's Revolutionary Guard vows payback.
It will certainly be against a high-ranking Israeli official, and really could be anywhere worldwide, but likely probably in Israel itself.
Now the White House is on high alert after reports that Iran may plan to hit targets inside Israel as payback. In response, a senior White House official telling News Nation today, quote, the president and the prime minister spoke about these threats. The United States fully supports the defense of Israel against threats from Iran.
Iran really won't find it necessary to hide behind one of their usual proxies, such as Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. But Iran could directly strike Israel should they so desire.
Iran calling Israel's strike in Syria an attack on Iran itself. Iran's leaders warning the White House not to get involved in the fight between Israel and Iran, saying, quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran warns U.S. leadership not to get dragged in Netanyahu's trap for us. Stay away so you won't get hurt.
And the Iranian president's chief of staff also went on to say that the United States asked Iran not to target their facilities in strikes. We reached out to our sources at the White House, and a senior official tells me, quote, it's an Iranian spin. We received a message from Iran following the strike in Damascus. In response, we made clear that we were not behind the strike. We also warned Iran not to use the strike as a pretext to further escalate in the region or attack U.S. facilities or personnel. Natasha.
Okay, Alina Shirazi with that report. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't.
Escalation is like throwing gasoline on the flames.
U.S. authorities warning Iran may be preparing for a retaliatory attack against Israel.
Iran has just lost a major general. This is humiliating to the Iranians They have to respond.
A deadly IDF airstrike killed 7 Revolutionary Guard members, including a top commander in Syria last week. A U.S. official tells ABC News retaliation could come as soon as this weekend or next week. Islamic history professor Brian Glynn Williams says any type of escalation will likely put U.S. troops in harm's way.
In the eyes of the Iranians, America is in many ways an ally, a co-belligerent alongside the Israelis.
This comes as the Israeli military fired 2 officers and suspended 2 commanders for the IDF attack that killed 7 aid workers in Gaza, including a dual U.S. citizen.
It was a terrible chain of errors, and it should never have happened.
Some legislators representing Massachusetts say Israel must have a more targeted approach.
They've had more than one incident like this that just questions how they're making these difficult, admittedly difficult, but decisions that they have to get right.
We need the ceasefire. We need the hostages returned. We need Israel to open up so humanitarian relief can flow in. And we've got to be pressing the parties toward a 2-state solution.
Professor Williams tells me he does not believe Iran will bring any war efforts here to the U.S., instead focusing on assets stationed in the Middle East.
Now, what are the takeaways from these 2 videos? Takeaway number 1. The apartheid Zionist state of Israel violated international law again. This is something that this apartheid state routinely does. And it's able to get away with it. Why? Because the international community of nations allows it to. There is clearly established international law that is enforceable when the international community wants to enforce it. And the longer the international community that is basically dictated to by the UN Security Council allows these types of transgressions to go without consequence, it just opens the door to more and more of this happening, and Israel responding along with its enablers with the routine bodyguard of lies. This is what happens when they are willing to take responsibility, when they are willing to accept responsibility. Right now, they're not accepting responsibility for the violation of the embassy attack that took the lives of a number of Iranian personnel, including one or more leading generals within the military. And this was on an embassy. Again, a gross violation of international law. And then the relief workers. I mean, subhanAllah, when you reflect upon the scenario that unfolded in Gaza that took the life of these 7 relief workers, it is absolutely appalling. I mean, first, one vehicle was attacked with a drone strike. Those who survived that drone strike, they left that vehicle and went to the second vehicle. That too was targeted. And then they left that vehicle, went to a third vehicle, and that too was immediately targeted, resulting in the lives of 7 international humanitarian relief workers. And it's truly, truly unconscionable what was done. It is even more unconscionable that this apartheid state is again not being held accountable. Even the remarks that came from these U.S. politicians they were not as strong, and they were simply not as strong as they should have been. You know, this almost apologetic tone on behalf of the apartheid state of Israel, you know, that, you know, basically conveying the thought that a mistake happened. A mistake happened in the fog of war. And SubhanAllah, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, these three vehicles that were well marked, that before the attempted transfer of much needed humanitarian relief supplies, food for a starving population was delivered, it was coordinated, or so they thought, with Israeli officials. I mean, the itinerary of these vehicles, it was clearly shared with the Israeli authorities, with the military. And again, the vehicles were well marked. There was no excuse for them being targeted the way that they were. And no doubt those who are responsible for the attack on these vehicles, the loss of 7 international humanitarian relief lives, will end up getting a slap on the wrist. And I'm reminded of that verse in the Quran that reads, in translation of the meaning from Surah Al-Hujurat, if a wicked person comes to you with any news, ascertain the truth. Otherwise, you can do harm to an innocent person unknowingly, and afterwards be full of regret for what you have done. Now, we have American politicians that buy into the lie. It was a mistake, a tragic error in judgment. It was nothing of that sort. It was deliberate. And this, again, repeated call for a two-state solution is one that defies intelligence. I mean, our politicians need to stop making that ridiculous call, because, you know, the opportunity for a two-state solution is long gone. It's long gone. That tortured part of the world needs to follow the example that was set by the former apartheid South Africa when apartheid in that country was dismantled. Two-state solution is out of the question. With that being said, let's go to the next video, the third video, Brother Sadiq.
Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and Egypt have all been collaborating with Israel behind the scenes to circumvent the actions of one of the only Arab powers to challenge Israel with concrete action, and that's Yemen. In a bid to alleviate pressure on Israel from the Ansar Allah or Houthi blockade of the Red Sea, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Jordan have all established land corridors, ensuring cargo destined for the apartheid state arrives safely in Israeli hands. Now, according to Hebrew Channel 13, Israeli-linked cargo ships arrive in the UAE to unload goods. Trucks then transport these goods through the UAE and Saudi highways to Jordan. They eventually reach Israel via the Jordan River crossing. German shipping company Hapag-Lloyd announced that it was working with Saudi Arabia and the UAE to create a land route bypassing the Houthis, which connects ports in the UAE and the Saudi Arabian port of Jeddah, facilitating cargo movement to Israel through the Suez Canal. Now, Egypt has also joined the effort, operating container ships from its port to the Israeli port of Ashdod, further supporting the land bridge initiative and assuring Israeli commerce is not interrupted amid its genocidal campaign.
Okay, I don't understand why we had that double speak in that video. But anyway, the whole thrust of the message from that video conveys something that, for me as a Muslim, for me as someone who strives to be a sincere and committed Muslim, it really makes my heart heavy. SubhanAllah, it really makes my heart heavy, and I feel ashamed for these nation states that are supposed to be Muslim, who are committing grave violations to ethics, to principles, to, SubhanAllah, to Islam itself. We have, and we have had for years now, a growing BDS movement, boycott, sanctions, divestment, and sanctions movement against apartheid Zionist Israel. That movement, by the grace and mercy of Allah, operating through the goodwill of committed people in different parts of the world, has been growing and really becoming stronger and stronger, and it has caused the apartheid state of Israel and its affiliates, its facilitators, a great amount of consternation that how this BDS movement has been growing. Against the backdrop of this, we have a situation where, because of the outrageous genocidal behavior of this apartheid state, you have one of the poorest countries in the world, but a proud Muslim country, Yemen. It's been doing what it can to disrupt the flow of transatlantic goods, weaponry, no doubt, and other needs of the apartheid state of Israel in international waters. They've disrupted that. This small, poor state in terms of material substance, but rich, truly rich in terms of their understanding of the deen, especially as it pertains to the responsibility they have to their fellow Muslim brethren who are suffering, again, a genocide. So, what does a number of well-situated, wealthy Gulf countries do? Do they lend support to this BDS initiative that Yemen has waged against this apartheid state that's been engaged for the past 6 months in genocide? No, they don't support that effort. What they do is they, according to the reports, they have provided a land bridge to enable Israel to get the goods and services that have been disrupted in the sea lanes. They're able to get them through this land bridge, courtesy of a number of quote unquote Arab Muslim countries. Oh, the shame of it. It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. And it's about time for our Muslim brothers and sisters in other parts of the world who have benefited in one way or another from the material largesse of one or more of these compromised governments. It's long past due for those of us who have been in this position to find the strength, the integrity, the principle to call a spade a spade. And if that means that you no longer have a cozy relationship with this Gulf country or that Gulf country who are committing these grave injustices against their own people, then so be it. So be it. Life is short. And sooner or later, we all have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not about who is able to provide us with the money to build a new masjid or to expand an existing masjid, or to build a school, or to expand the school. It's not about that, brothers and sisters. I mean, you don't make that kind of trade-off in good conscience. Okay, if you give us the money, if you buy us, you know, we will remain silent. And we will do as much as we possibly can in our part of the hemisphere, in the Western hemisphere. We will do our part, you know, to silence the voices of dissent, the voices of criticism that may raise their voices of criticism against you. You know, you can buy us off. SubhanAllah, this has got to stop, because the day will come. You know, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, he said, actions are judged, yes, by intention. And every man and woman will have what they intended. So, you know, the fruits, the consequences of what they intended. And, but we are reminded of the accountability we have to Allah and the accountability that we have to each other, based upon that accountability that we have first and foremost to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should not allow ourselves to be bought. Again, what these Gulf countries, what these rich, well-situated Gulf countries are doing is absolutely horrendous. Providing a land bridge that allows the weaponry, among other things, that's being used to commit genocide against our Palestinian brothers and sisters, to be able to make its way to this apartheid state. It is absolutely shameful. This is what it is. With that being said, let's go to that final video. We're going to spend most of our time talking about the issues raised in this final video of ours.
The case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui remains a mystery. The US-educated PhD graduate went missing along with her 3 children.
What happened to the video, Brother Sadiq?
The case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui remains a mystery. The US-educated PhD graduate went missing along with The case of Dr. Afia Siddiqui remains a mystery. The US-educated PhD graduate went missing along with her 3 children 5 years ago while on her way to catch a domestic flight in her native Pakistan. Her whereabouts since then remains unknown, although her family and human rights activists believe she was held in the custody of either the US or Pakistani intelligence services as part of the war on terror.
We want to know what happened to Afia Siddiqui from 31st of March 2003 until 17th of July 2008.
The US has always denied that it held any female prisoners in its main Afghan holding facility in Bagram Air Base. However, suspicion was aroused when the former Guantanamo Bay detainee Muazzam Beg, who also spent a long spell in Bagram, said he heard the sound of a woman being abused on several occasions.
When I was in Bagram during the year of 2002, I used to hear the sounds of a woman screaming in the interrogation rooms where I was at, or adjacent to it, and I was led to believe that it was my own wife being tortured next door. The screams were intermittent, they were very sharp, they were high-pitched, they were evidently of a woman. She was frightened, she was terrified in fact.
A major turning point of the case came after the Pakistani political opposition leader Imran Khan and a group of human rights activists from the UK held a press conference outlining Dr. Siddiqui's story and their suspicions. 1 month later, the US claimed to have arrested Afia Siddiqui in Afghanistan after she had apparently attempted to attack US military personnel. But the US government hasn't given any explanation for her absence of several years, other than accusing her of having links with Al-Qaeda. She now faces trial in New York, charged with the attempted murder of US personnel.
Well, at the moment, sadly, she's very ill. She's very ill to communicate with anybody, really. And she's had difficulty communicating with her lawyers due to the harsh, humiliating restrictions imposed by the jail authorities. And also, she's just not well enough. And she really, at this moment, she needs to be treated. Once she's recovered, then she can deal with the legal process.
Further confusing matters, following inquiries, the US government has now backtracked on its previous statement that it had never held any female detainees at Bagram Air Base. It's now admitted to holding one female prisoner, but maintains it never held Dr. Afia Siddiqui. Nonetheless, the U-turn has raised more questions and doubts over the US government's account of Dr. Siddiqui's arrest, and has given some credence to her claims of being held in Bagram for several years. Furthermore, her case has come to symbolize the plight of hundreds of Pakistani citizens who've gone missing over the years and are alleged to have been kidnapped by Pakistani and US intelligence agencies.
It is not only the case of Afia Siddiqui, it is the case of more than 500 missing persons. If the State Department could make a false denial about Afia Siddiqui, and if the President of Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf, in his book In the Line of Fire, admits that he has been selling the bodies of the Pakistani citizens to the FBI and US State Department, and despite that, we don't know the whereabouts of our Pakistanis. Sir, it's a very serious issue.
The previous government of Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf had been accused of kidnapping and handing over hundreds of its citizens to US intelligence agencies in return for financial and military support in the years following the invasion of Afghanistan. It's an allegation that President Musharraf himself denied, but human rights groups believe Dr. Siddiqui's case represents just one of those hundreds of kidnappings.
Okay, we are winding down now, and I wanted to end the broadcast with information on our sister Afia, our many other political prisoners. She's not the only one we're concerned about. But if we can't do anything for Afia Siddiqui, an exceptional Muslim woman, if we're unwilling to even try to do anything for a sister of ours, especially a sister of the caliber of Afia Siddiqui, then we're not going to give any attention to anyone else. I mean, that's the cold-blooded reality. We are in the final days of Ramadan, and Our sister Afia last month, Women's History Month, which also happens to be March, is the month where Afia was born. That's her birth month. It's also the month in which our sister Afia was disappeared. It was March 30th, 2003, after she had returned back home to Karachi, Pakistan, after 12 very fruitful years in the United States. I'm just rehearsing, or I should say revisiting, some of the details of what happened to her for the benefit of those of you who still don't know what you should know about Afia Siddiqui. And part of the reason for that is because our Muslim establishment in the United States and abroad, but especially here in the United States, where this sister of ours has been wrongfully imprisoned and tortured for years. She's right in our backyard. We have a direct responsibility for her. According to the Quran and prophetic Sunnah and the Seerah of Islam, the healthy and uplifting parts of the Seerah of Islam, we have a very special, very unique and special responsibility to our Muslim sisters who are being oppressed. And subhanAllah, we have failed on a number of fronts to address the oppression of the few sisters that we know of that are wrongfully imprisoned, Afia being at the top of the list, and our brothers, our many brothers, hundreds of brothers that have been wrongfully imprisoned in the United States and also in Pakistan, the disappeared of Pakistan. But again, here in the United States, where we have the ability to do, to act and to be able to make a difference on our home turf, it is absolutely shameful on our part that we have not yet measured up on this front. It's so exciting and encouraging to see the way that our community in different parts of the U.S. has responded to the Nakba, the catastrophe that the world is witnessing in Gaza. It is, for me, as a seasoned activist that's been involved in this work for so many years, it's encouraging for me to be able to see how, the strength in numbers consistently that have gone into the streets over the past 6 months. But the reality is that much of a good portion of the activism that we have seen on the part of Muslims, not all Muslims, but a large swath and quite possibly the majority of Muslims that have taken to the streets. A lot of this has been encouraged by the large number of non-Muslims that have taken to the streets, the large number of non-Muslims that have expressed public outrage on a sustained basis. I can only wonder how strong the response from the Muslim community would be if they didn't have, if we didn't have our non-Muslim activists and concerned citizens out there with us as well. We don't have a very encouraging record of being courageous on our own. And that brings me to what happened about a week ago. We had a press conference on Capitol Hill, right on the perimeter of Capitol Hill, just walking distance from the U.S. Capitol. The press conference was outside the building that houses the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. Now, this is the agency, the organization that's over all of the federal prisons throughout the United States. U.S. Bureau of Prisons. This is the organization that houses, and having to use, using their terminology, houses prisoners such as Dr. Afia Siddiqui, Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, the Holy Land Five, these Palestinian brothers who, before the organization that they established was shut down, it was the largest Muslim charity in the United States, if not in the world, certainly one of the largest in the world, if not the largest. And it was known for its humanitarian relief work, not just in the Muslim world, not just in occupied Palestine, but in many other places as well, in many other parts of the world that were non-Muslim as well. They were known for their good work. And subhanAllah, what the apartheid Zionist state of Israel did to the Holy Land Foundation was just recently repeated with UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Organization for Palestine. You know, this is an organization that has been around since 1948, 1949. This is an organization, a relief organization that was actually started within the UN, initiated by the United States. An organization that has tremendous years-long reputation for impact on the humanitarian relief front and for integrity. Again, one of the oldest organizations, relief organizations, goes all the way back to the start of the United Nations. And subhanAllah, the apartheid state of Israel hurled accusations against UNRWA that have yet to be proven, they have yet to provide the evidence to support the allegation that 7 members, or was it 9 members, less than a dozen members of UNRWA out of thousands of UNRWA workers. I mean, think about that. Even if what the Israel accused them of doing, these 7 or 9 workers, these less than a dozen workers out of a organization population of thousands, even if it were true, you don't shut down an organization of this consequence over the actions of such a few. But the fact of the matter is, even this few that were accused, there has yet to be evidence shown. But this is what they did successfully with the Holy Land Foundation. First, they were able to get the United States to freeze the assets of the Holy Land Foundation. And then after the brothers who petitioned through their lawyers the courts to either prove them guilty or lift the sanctions, the unjust sanctions that were imposed upon them. When that didn't happen, then the U.S. government, under the influence of the apartheid state and its lobby here in the United States, brought charges against them. They shut down the organization and then brought charges against the founders and some of the workers, and then subsequently charged them with giving material support to terrorism in a federal court, a couple of federal courts. I mean, this went on for a while. And at the end of the day, as in so many of these cases, despite the absence of evidence to prove guilt, these men were found guilty and they were given life sentences. The organization was shut down and they were given life sentences. When this happened to UNRWA recently, I immediately thought about HLF, the Holy Land Foundation. And then we have so many others. We have the Raleigh 7 case, these 7 Muslim men, most of them very young men, accused of a terrorism conspiracy. You had the Fort Dix 5, accused of a terrorism conspiracy. You had the young brothers out of the Washington area, what the government called the Virginia Jihad Network case. We called it the paintball case. I mean, there's just been so many of these cases in different parts of the country involving, at times, groups of young men, the young Somalis in Minnesota, that case, and other times, 1 or 2. I mean, I've been in so many courthouses throughout this still potentially great but deeply disturbed nation called America. So many courthouses over the years, and always federal courthouses, always federal cases. And the only example that immediately comes to mind, a very prominent case, was the case of Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin. Now, that was a state of Georgia case, but despite it being a state of Georgia case, Imam Jamil ended up, after his conviction and spending a little time in a maximum security state prison in Georgia, was transferred over to the custody of the federal government, and initially was put in America's only supermax prison in Colorado. Today, he is in a federal prison in the state of Arizona. But again, we have hundreds of Muslims. And in most of these cases that I am familiar with, in most of these cases, the case of Dr. Tariq Mahanna in Boston, and the case of Ahmed Omar Abu Ali in the Washington area in Virginia. I mean, just in so many of these cases, you can see the hand of Zionism clearly, plain and simple. And in many of these cases, in most of these cases, you had Zionist prosecutors leading the charge. And in some of the cases, you had Zionist judges, like in the case of Afia Siddiqui, a Zionist judge, Richard Berman, who was openly biased against our sister in that case, in what a proceeding that masqueraded as a trial from start to finish. And I'm not telling you something that I heard second or third hand or read. I was there. I was in that courthouse for the preliminary hearings all the way up through the trial itself. I witnessed it with my own eyes and ears. You know, the government star witnesses lying under oath, contradicting not only each other, but contradicting some of their own earlier sworn testimony and affidavits. You know, they forgot what they said. And it was a farce of a trial. But because of the way Afia Siddiqui had been maligned in the media, in the lead up to this trial that took place in a courthouse just blocks away from Ground Zero, it was shameful, absolutely shameful. And our sister, at the end of the day, despite being the only person who was injured by a U.S. warrant officer, a soldier, who panicked when he saw that she was not restrained in manacles. When she appeared looking behind from behind the curtain, he panicked and he jumped up and he shouted, "The prisoner is free." And he shot her. She was the only one injured. And their cover story was, one of the soldiers in a war zone, laid his M4 rifle on the floor. And she came through the curtain like a female Rambo, picked it up, took the safety off of it, and tried to shoot her way out of captivity. She fired the weapon, according to them. But at the end of the day, in this crowded room, only she was shot. And the ballistics evidence didn't show that any other weapon was shot except for the weapon that was used to shoot her. The shell casings that were recovered and introduced in the trial as evidence, only the shell casings that came from the warrant officer's weapon that was used to shoot her. And yet she was charged with attempted murder of U.S. personnel. And for attempted murder in which no one was injured but Afia Siddiqui, she gets a sentence of 86 years, a life sentence. SubhanAllah, it's ridiculous, it's shameful, but what's even more shameful is the fact that we have yet, knowing about Afia Siddiqui since 2008, after 5 years of secret imprisonment and torture, her being missing, and being allowed to resurface because men who had escaped from Bagram, and then subsequent to that, a man who was released from Bagram, told the stories of this woman who was being held at Bagram, this one woman. And subsequent to that, positively identified that one mysterious woman who was known by her number, prisoner 650, who was tortured, who they would hear her haunting screams. SubhanAllah. After that information was divulged and word got out, and people began to put pressure, important people, prominent people, internationally, began to put pressure on the governments, the U.S. government and the Pakistani government, because she's a Pakistani citizen, as you saw in that short piece of video, the last video. SubhanAllah, they hatched a plot to try to get rid of her while she was still in Afghanistan. And it didn't work. She was shot, but she was not killed. She was brought back to the United States, again put on trial, blocks away from ground zero, given an 86-year sentence. Her children, her two eldest children, who were missing along with her, held in separate places. Her daughter, Mariam, having been briefly adopted by an American family in Afghanistan. Her son in a juvenile lockup, after being returned back home to their family in Pakistan. The youngest baby, the youngest child, having died during that kidnapping operation. I mean, this is the case that the late former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark described as the worst case of individual injustice I have ever witnessed. And when I heard him say this, I was in his presence when he said this. When I heard him say this, it resonated with me because of all the cases I had seen up to that point. And to be honest, I have seen since. This is the worst case of individual injustice I have ever witnessed. And this is the reason why I have been so passionately connected to this case for so long. So with that said, we are at the end of our broadcast. We got a little bit of a late start because of technical issues on the South African side. But inshallah ta'ala, you know, I'm glad that we were able to do this broadcast. Nevertheless, it's very important coming at the end of Ramadan. We just have a couple of days left. You know, this day that we're in, it may be the Laylatul Qadr, the night of power. Brothers and sisters, I want to end this with broadcast with this. Again, I repeat, if we cannot at least make a sincere effort without any excuses, a sincere effort nationwide, north, south, east, and west, to help our sister get her freedom and return back to her family where she belongs. If we can't do this with Afia Siddiqui, none of our other prisoners stand a snowball's chance in hell of getting their communities support. And I often say to my brothers and sisters when I speak to audiences large and small, don't wait for something like this to happen to you or to someone that you love before you become concerned. We must transfer the concern, alhamdulillah, the wonderful concern that we are seeing expressed consistently, massively in the public square for our brothers and sisters in Gaza because of that genocide that is taking place. We must be willing to transfer some of that concern to our political prisoners. This is an opportunity for us. The doors are open for a new level of consciousness for our non-Muslim relatives and friends and neighbors to become aware, more aware of what has been done to innocent men and some women and some children in the name of national security and a war on terrorism. An agenda that has come from some of the same forces that are behind the genocide we see taking place in occupied Palestine. We must respond in the manner that we should. Because if we don't, all we do is encourage more and more of the same. I started out a little while back mentioning the press conference we had at the BOP. I was quite disturbed by the fact that we had Muslims and non-Muslims who were in the halls of Congress just blocks away, about a 10, 15-minute walk at the most, that just didn't see the need to join us. Why? Because this is a case involving a Muslim woman who has been so maligned that some of us have chosen, and this is what you have to do. You have to choose to believe the narrative, that twisted narrative that you can find on Wikipedia. I mean, subhanAllah, things that are said that have already been disproven, and they're still there, and they're still influencing people, discouraging them from doing the right thing as it pertains to this wrongfully imprisoned woman who was being tortured. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, if our non-Muslim friends choose to believe that Afia Siddiqui is guilty, if they want to choose to believe that Imam Jamil Abdul Alameen is guilty, if they want to choose to believe that the Holy Land Foundation it was right to have been shut down, and for the brothers who started it and brothers who worked through it to have been prosecuted and given life sentences. If we choose to believe this, or if I should say, if our non-Muslim brethren choose to believe this, we have a higher obligation. We have the responsibility to give our brothers and sisters the benefit of whatever doubt we might have. You know, a presumption of innocence and due process rights. It's not something that began with the Magna Carta out of the UK or, the Constitution of the United States. Due process rights and a presumption of innocence until proven guilty is something that is rooted in Islamic jurisprudence. This is where they got it from. So on that note, I'll end and just simply say to those of you who feel the urgency of this appeal, please, we have a very special mobilization coming up for Dr. Afia Siddiqui in Texas next month on the 19th. We're going to have a rally outside FMC Carswell, outside that military reserve base where she is being held oppressively. The day before that, we're going to have a conference in the DFW area on Zionism, Hindutva, and Western imperialism. So a conference on the 18th, a rally on the 19th, right there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we would like for you to join us, those of you who can, but we would also like for those of you in a position to donate to this campaign, to donate to the work of the Afia Foundation, and to do so post haste. Make that donation in the month of Ramadan before this month leaves, so that what you give is magnified manyfold. And I would also like to add to our deep-pocketed brethren in South Africa, that you can give as well. We have a mechanism by which you can give, and your donations will go directly into the account of the Afia Foundation. Alhamdulillah, we had a brother, I don't know if it was one brother, if it was our one brother, alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala bless him, or if it was him, and under his influence and leadership, bringing others on board as well. But they made a generous donation to the Afia Foundation's work out of Norway, out of Oslo. So that's the only international donation we've received thus far. But again, we need your support. So go to our website, afia.org, www.afia.org. And before this blessed month is out, make a donation to the work of the Afia Foundation. It's one of the most meritorious forms of zakat or sadaqah you can give to my Muslim brothers and sisters, and to both Muslims and non-Muslims. This is something that is desperately needed in order for us to be able to do what we do, and it would be very deeply appreciated. So on this note, I close, as we normally do, with Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihat. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in the translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.